Of course, the test isn't whether publishers are getting dollars for ad space. The test is whether the dollars they get are competitive rates or whether they're suppressed because of anti-competitive conduct like tying. Am I missing something there?
I think when the UK looked at this issue, they found that the industry average for how much rev share was shared with publishers was around 67%. Again, our tools are higher than approximately at or higher than 69%. So we're certainly market competitive with the other tools that are out there.
Okay, let's talk about YouTube, about Google and about YouTube for a minute. As you know, your company has a very strong position as an online publisher, particularly with respect to YouTube. This is an innovation. It's an asset that you've got in your company that is very valuable. And if an advertiser wants to place an ad on YouTube, as I understand it, please correct me if I'm wrong, as I understand it, since 2015, the policy has been that the advertiser wanting to place an advertisement on YouTube has no choice pursuant to Google's policy but to use Google's own ad buying platform. And so I've got some questions about this, about why Google chose to implement this restriction and whether that doesn't have some tendency to exclude competing demand-side platforms from the market. So, for example, let's assume, Mr. Harrison, that if YouTube were an independent actor, and as such, as an independent actor trying to maximize demand and revenue, and why wouldn't YouTube in that circumstance open up its inventory to as many demand-side platforms as possible, and therefore as many bidders as possible? Wouldn't that make sense?
Senator, I think it depends on the goals of the platform, of the website. In this case, again, we were trying to balance new features that we were introducing with the fact that those new features weren't offered by other platforms and other inventory, and therefore it would have been very hard to sell that inventory side by side. I also think, to answer your question, that there are lots of examples of companies choosing to self-provision, their own inventory. Facebook is an example. Snap is an example. Pinterest is an example. These are all companies that have not chosen to open up their inventory, but to require to use their tools in order to directly purchase their inventory. Again, in many cases, and I know this is the case with Snap and Pinterest, they're trying to balance privacy and some of the features they have around privacy with the sale of advertising, and are very protective of that. And I think the confluence of those two things gives you a reason why people have chosen different ways in order to sell their advertising.
Those companies aren't must-have properties, though. I mean, they are different than yours, right?
Again, I don't know what must-have in this context means. The ability to reach your consumers, for an advertiser to reach its consumers. I do think these are platforms that have they have their specific focus, but they're very important in order to reach their consumers and point to the massive amount of choice that's in the ecosystem out there. If you're an advertiser and want to try to find a way to sell your product.
I know you claim that advertisers might end up bidding against themselves, but surely the world's largest technology company, that is your company, Google, is capable of creating a workaround to prevent that. If advertisers, assuming the advertisers couldn't do it themselves, you being the world's biggest technology company and the most successful one, surely you could figure that out. I mean, how is this not just a sort of cynical effort to leverage the market power of Google's properties like search and YouTube into something of a monopoly in online advertising?
Senator, I want to point out that we're not the largest technology company in the world. There are at least 3 other technology companies right now that are significantly larger than us. And
Okay, you get the point. I mean, surely we're not going to quibble here about whether or not Google is a large technology company. I get your point. If you want to split hairs there, that's fine. My point is, I don't think there aren't many in the world with the skill and the expertise that you've got, right?
Agree. In the areas we compete in, yes. And so, sorry, Senator, your question is?
Yeah, so my question is, why couldn't you just figure out a workaround for that so that they didn't end up bidding against themselves? I mean, that sounds to me like something that's not really all that difficult of a thing, technologically speaking, down the line.
Senator, it's a good question. A lot of this is a complex ecosystem. A lot of the points I've tried to make are that complexity is as a result of the fact that you have almost 800 participants in the ecosystem. There is an issue with the fact that there are so many platforms on one side and so many platforms on another, that you have advertisers bidding into so many different platforms that may be aggregating demand from the same sources, that they end up competing with themselves. I think one of our criticisms of a tool called header bidding, which by the way we fully work with, when header bidding came out, it was opaque to advertisers as to how they were bidding. It was better for publishers. Publishers were making more money. I don't quibble with that, but it was difficult for advertisers because they didn't know how their dollars were competing with themselves. And one of our issues was to try to stitch that back together with a new product called Open Bidding that tried to give this transparency back to the advertisers. I think with any large ecosystem, especially one as complex as ad tech, the more participants you have, the more likely that you have the situation where advertisers can bid against themselves. In an ideal world, there's one tool, and then advertisers and publishers have perfect transparency across all of those tools in order to both sell and buy advertising. But that's not the state of the market today, and I don't think you want us to be that one tool that would sort of solve the issue that you're raising.
Let's move on to a different issue. Mr. Harrison, it's my understanding that Google does not provide advertisers specific information on the effectiveness of particular ads that they run, such as how many clicks an ad received or how many people who happened to click on a particular ad actually made a purchase. In other words, how many of them resulted in closing a sale. That seems like an important piece of information, or an important category of information, rather, for advertisers to have when doing comparison shopping and when making strategic decisions about how, when, whether, to what extent, in what way, through what platforms to advertise. And from what I hear, Google's competitors provide or allowed third parties to provide this kind of information. Will Google provide advertisers with non-aggregated information about the effectiveness of particular ad impressions?
Senator, I'm surprised at this, and maybe it's because I'm not understanding you. We have whole teams that are dedicated to nothing but helping advertisers calculate their return on investment, their ROI on their advertising dollars spent. The whole reason that I think Google has been able to be successful, and particularly successful with small and medium businesses, again, we level the scales a bit, as opposed to it when large companies could only buy television advertising or radio advertising. We allow small companies to spend very small amounts of money in order to access the advertising ecosystem. There's a great example of a company called Strider Bikes out of South Dakota that is able to use our tools to now sell 50% of their inventory internationally. Not only do we provide that capability, but we also give them many, many tools in order to figure out whether or not they're getting a return on their investment. So I am surprised. It's possible that I'm not understanding your question, but we give advertisers tremendous tools to figure out whether or not there's value in the advertising that they're spending.
Okay, so how do you respond to those claims that you don't provide them? How do you respond to claims that from advertisers that you don't give them that information? Is that just wrong?
Well, there seems to be and sorry, Senator, if I'm understanding your question, there seems to be specific types of information they're looking for. I'm worried that either perhaps we restrict that information because it's private data.
No, I think one of the claims they make is that to the extent you provide them with some information about it, it isn't as good, it isn't as robust, it's not as complete as what they get from your competitors.
I would have to, and by the way, very happy to follow up with you in order to understand your question. We give advertisers as much data as we can. It is possible that some of the data that you're asking for relates to specific behavior of the ad as compared to specific users or aggregations of users. And again, we're careful to protect the privacy of the people that use our platform. And there is a limit on how much of that information we can share with advertisers.
Okay. All right. I see my time's expired. Senator Cruz is up next. Senator Cruz.